The mountains greeted them the way old giants do, silent, towering, watching. By the time Cole and Eve reached the cabin, dusk had deepened into a soft blue hush. The small wooden home sat tucked between tall pines, smoke curling from its chimney like a fragile thread stitching sky to earth. Inside, the space was warm but worn. A stone hearth, a narrow bed, a table scarred by years of solitude. Eve stood there quietly, breathing in the scent of pine, old wood, and something else. Loneliness, maybe. The kind that clings to walls when a man has lived with only his regrets for company. Cole set down his gear with a muted grunt. His injured shoulder stiffened with the effort. Eve noticed immediately. "You should sit," she murmured. He hesitated. Mountain men rarely accepted help, but finally lowered himself into a chair. Eve lit the lantern, washed her hands, and opened her cooking box with reverence, as though unsealing a part of herself she'd lost long ago. Soon the smell of rabbit stew filled the room, herbs simmering, broth bubbling. Eve moved quietly, almost gracefully, her hands remembering what her life had once been before shame took root. Cole watched her, the careful way she chopped onions, the patience in her stirring. It wasn't admiration he felt, it was recognition. She worked the way he lived, quietly, trying not to disturb the world. When she set the bowl in front of him, steam rising like a prayer, he said softly, "Thank you." 2 simple words, but they landed somewhere deep inside her chest. For 3 days they lived in a strange, delicate rhythm. Eve cooked. Cole chopped firewood with one arm, slower and more stubborn than usual. They spoke only when necessary. Silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply the space between 2 people who weren't ready to let their hearts leak into the world again. But the gestures were speaking. Cole warming a mug and handing it to her before she touched the cold stove. Eve folding his shirts and leaving them neatly by his bed. Cole covering the window crack with a spare piece of cloth so the wind wouldn't chill her. Eve mending a tear in his coat while he pretended not to notice. Each act tiny, each act loud, each act building something neither dared to name. One evening, rain whispered across the roof in soft, steady rhythms. The kind of night that presses close and reminds you of every hurt you've ever carried. Eve stood by the fire, arms wrapped around herself. She looked small in the flickering light. Fragile. Breakable. "Cole," she whispered, "can I ask you something?" He looked up from a stool he was repairing. "Sure." She took a trembling breath. Do you think less of a woman who can't give a child?" Cole inhaled, slow and heavy. The room seemed to still around them, listening. Eve continued, her voice cracking. "My husband's family blamed me. The doctor blamed me. Sometimes I think even God must have turned his face away. I feel empty, like a cracked pot that can't hold anything worth keeping." Cole set down the wooden piece. His expression softened the way mountains soften under morning mist, barely, but enough to see. "Pain don't decide a person's worth," he murmured. "I've seen strong men break from things they couldn't control. I've seen land turn barren from no fault of its own. Doesn't make it useless. Just means it's been hurt." Eve's breath hitched. Tears glittered but didn't fall. After a long quiet, she asked, "Has someone ever left you for something you couldn't fix?" Cole's eyes lowered to the floorboards. "Yeah." He spoke of a woman named Lila, his fiancée, who miscarried years ago. How she blamed his life in the mountains for the loss. How she packed her things and walked away without looking back. "After that," he said, voice rough, "I figured I weren't made to keep anything alive or close." Their eyes met in the soft glow of the fire. Not romantically, not yet, but with a shared understanding that stitched them closer than words ever could. Days later, just before dawn, the sound of hooves scraped the quiet outside. Sheriff Amos Kincaid appeared at the cabin door, his hat dripping with fog. "Cole," he said, stepping inside. "Town's whispering up a storm." Eve stiffened. "Folks say you took her up here improperly. That maybe she wasn't safe with a man like you." Amos turned to her gently. "Eve, if you feel pressured, you have a place in town." Cole's jaw clenched. "She ain't here against her will." Amos nodded. "Just doing my duty. But the The same cold shame Eve thought she'd left behind crept back up her spine, lighting her skin on fire. As Amos rode away, she felt the world shrink again, the walls press in. That night, she quietly packed her cooking box. Cole woke as she was slipping outside. Eve, she froze. Moonlight sifted through the trees, painting her face in silver sorrow. I should go, she whispered. I bring trouble to every place I try to belong. Maybe you'd be better alone. Cole stepped closer, but didn't touch her. His voice came low, steady, carved from truth. You brought warmth to a house that didn't know what it felt like anymore. Stay. Eve looked up, really looked, and for the first time saw a man who wasn't pushing her away or pulling her close for selfish reasons. Just a man asking her not to disappear. But before she could answer, a crack tore through the night. Thunder. Then another sound, the distant roar of trees burning. A wildfire sparked by lightning, racing across the ridge like a monster made of smoke and fury. Cole's eyes widened. We have to move. Flames climbed the mountainside, snapping branches like bones. Smoke billowed thick and fast. Eve grabbed supplies while Cole tried to save his old belongings. Letters, carved wood pieces, a jacket worn thin by years of solitude. Leave it, she cried. It's all I got left, he muttered. A burning tree fell nearby, showering sparks over them. Cole stumbled, his injured shoulder giving out, crashing to the ground. Cole! Eve lunged, dragging him to his feet with a strength born from something deeper than fear. They ran together, smoke clawing their lungs, heat licking their backs. Sparks fell around them like burning stars shedding their last light. At last they collapsed in a clearing where the fire couldn't reach. Cole coughed violently, gripping Eve's arm. You saved me, he rasped. Don't ever call yourself less. The dawn rose red over the charred ridge, soft light breaking through smoke. Eve looked at Cole, not the mountain man, not the myth, but the human being who saw her without judgment. And something inside her, a place long locked, finally opened. Back in town, the wildfire changed people, burned away old gossip. Even Sheriff Amos apologized. Tom Caldwell offered her work. Martha Tate went quiet for once. But Eve didn't step forward alone. Cole walked beside her, not holding her hand, but standing close enough that the space between them hummed with possibility. I still can't give a child, Eve whispered one evening, voice small. You gave me a reason to try again, Cole said softly. Sometimes hope's all a man really needs. She smiled, small at first, then wider, warmer. A smile that belonged not to a woman escaping shame, but to one stepping into her own worth. Together, they began rebuilding his cabin. Piece by piece, breath by breath, gesture by gesture. A slow beginning, a tender one, the kind that grows in quiet soil. And maybe, just maybe, something more waited down the road. A home, a partnership, a life not defined by what they lacked, but by what they offered each other. Dawn in Bramble Creek always rose soft and hesitant, as if the sun feared waking the ghosts the town carried. Dust floated through the air like tiny, drifting memories, catching the weak morning light and turning it gold. Men were just pulling open their shop doors. The saloon sign creaked as though it complained about another long day coming. And through that gentle, dusty glow walked Evelyn Harper, Eve, as her late husband used to call her, holding a battered tin cooking box close to her chest like it was the last warm thing she had left in this world. If you had stood there long enough, you might have heard an old soul whisper through the breeze. Grief has a sound, and today it echoed through her footsteps. Her shoes were worn, her dress a faded sky blue, washed, almost pale by too much use and too little care. The morning wind tugged softly at its hem, lifting it like tired wings trying to remember how to fly. Eve had come searching for something she had not tasted in many months. Work, yes, but also dignity, the quiet kind of woman keeps tucked beneath her ribs. She paused in front of Caldwell's saloon, took a breath that trembled faintly, and stepped inside. The place smelled of last night's whiskey and old smoke. Tom Caldwell, a gruff but decent man who had seen more secrets than sins, was wiping the counter as she approached. I was wondering, Eve began softly, her voice thin but steady, if you needed a cook. I can make enough stew to feed a trail crew, and biscuits that stay soft even a day old. Tom paused, cloth frozen midwipe. His eyes held something like sympathy and something sharper, heavier. Eve, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You know how folks talk. Her breath caught. She already knew the words. She'd heard them whispered behind church doors, across market stalls, in the pitying glances from old women and the cruel ones from young wives. You can't have children, they said. A woman like that brings no future. Bad luck, bad house, bad womb. She swallowed, throat tight. Still, she said it, because truth spoken softly sometimes hurts less than lies spoken loud. I can't have children, sir, but I can cook. Tom's expression twisted. Regret, not cruelty. But regret still shut doors. I'm sorry, Eve. 2 words. Enough to send her back out into the light with shame burning beneath her skin like a fever. She held her cooking box so tightly the metal edge dug into her palms. She did not cry. Not yet. Crying in Bramble Creek was something the dirt learned to hold. As she stepped outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the muted thunder of a horse's slow approach. He did not look up at first, but the town did. Because a figure like that, a man tall, broad, with a fur-lined coat and the scent of pine still clinging to him, did not pass through quietly. Cole Maddox had come down from the mountain. He rode his dark bay horse with the easy posture of someone who trusted the wild more than civilization. Pine needles still clung to his saddle straps. His eyes, cold blue like river ice, noted everything but judged nothing. He saw Eve exactly as she emerged from the saloon, saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she lowered her head, the way people turned away from her like she was a page they wished not to read. And for the smallest moment, their eyes met. Not in the way 2 people destined for romance collide in stories. No, it was a quiet meeting, like 2 weary travelers recognizing the loneliness in each other. He dismounted at the general store, his boots thudding against the wooden planks. He spoke little, only gathered supplies with his good hand, his left shoulder wrapped awkwardly under his coat. But even in his silence, he carried a presence the town could not ignore. He don't talk much, someone muttered. Lives alone up the ridge. Near wolves, they say. And worse things. Eve slipped away behind the general store to breathe, to steady herself before she broke. Her hands trembled as she set her cooking box beside her, pressing her forehead briefly against her knees. She did not hear Cole at first. His footsteps were quiet, respectful. He didn't speak, didn't ask what was wrong. He simply set a small burlap bag beside her on the ground, coffee beans, rich and fresh, and stepped back. Eve lifted her head, startled. Sir? He shook his head once, almost shyly. Just seemed like you needed something warm. No pity, just a small act of grace. He walked away without waiting for thanks. And somehow, the absence of expectation made Eve's chest tighten more than cruelty ever had. But Bramble Creek wasn't built on kindness. Not 10 minutes later, Martha Tate, queen of gossip, her lips sharper than any knife, cornered Eve between the store and the old water trough. Well, dear, Martha began sweetly. Tom turned you away, HM? Can't say I'm surprised. Men don't just need stew. They need a legacy. Eve stiffened. You can cook, sure, but you can't give a man a future. Eve's breath faltered. Shame rose again, hot, choking. But she didn't lash out, didn't defend herself, didn't crumble. I only offer what I have left, she whispered. Martha's smile thinned, pleased to have landed her blow. She drifted off, leaving cold words echoing behind her. Unseen by either woman, Cole leaned against his horse some distance away, watching the exchange with a jaw so tight it looked carved from granite. Later, much later, when the sun dipped behind the hills and shadows stretched long across the street, Eve gathered her things to leave town with nothing gained, nothing changed. She didn't notice Cole approaching again until his shadow merged with hers. You cooked at that saloon once, he said quietly. She blinked up at him. A long time ago. Food was good. Her lips parted faintly, surprised. Cole shifted his injured shoulder, grimacing. I could use a cook, just for a week. My arm ain't right. Cabin's up the ridge. Work's simple. Pays fair. Eve hesitated, not at the job, but at being seen. Sir, she said softly, I can cook, but I can't offer more. Cole's gaze lowered for a breath before rising again, steady. I came for food, not a family. A fragile sound escaped her, half relief, half disbelief. The town watched from doorways and windows as she climbed onto a spare horse he'd brought. Whispers rose like dust behind them. Why'd he pick her? Strange pair. You think he knows? But Eve didn't listen. She couldn't. The horizon was calling, and for the first time in months, she had a direction. Forward. They rode side by side in silence as the sky bled orange and purple. The mountains grew taller with each passing mile, their dark silhouettes jagged like old scars against the dying sun. The air cooled. Pine trees thickened. Crickets began their nightly hymn. Eve held her cooking box close, fingers brushing the dented lid the way one might touch a fragile prayer. Behind her, Bramble Creek shrank into a blur of judgment and whispers. Ahead, the mountains waited, not promising mercy. Mountains never did, but offering something quieter, something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. A space where shame might loosen its grip. A place where a woman might breathe again. Some journeys, they don't begin with hope. They begin with escape. And sometimes, hope decides to follow along, walking quietly beside you in the dusk.